Howdy ho, friends and foes, and welcome to Dad's on Life, your weekly episodic show about parenting from a male perspective. I'm your host, Jay Miles, and with me, as always, are my co hosts, Keith Bogan,
Chirp, chirp, buddy.
Doug Hammerdike,
Greetings from Bath.
and Chad Holloway.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be talking about siblings, families in general of being from single parent homes, and such things. Who would like to get us started?
I guess I can. uh, since I suggested, I guess I'll start. And after I thought about it, I was like thinking of one of the most famous sibling rivalries that came to my mind right away was Cain and Abel. And just at the right away that just jealousy, caused one to kill the other. And that's just crazy. But it also just brought up like one of those things where it's like one of those conversations where it's like for all of us, it's like we have to think back probably like 20 years or more about most of our sibling greatest stories. And some of them are great stories, and how we, as brothers, sisters, whoever's listening, what we either taught a sibling and or the fighting, between them. So it's a very versatile subject. And it also brings up, in the household, how you're viewed, as a sibling and or to your family, because there's like kingship and favoritism, and there's lots of different pitfalls and privilege that comes with either being a firstborn, second, maybe a middle child, And I think that most people, when they think of siblings, they think of like, maybe the core family dynamic of probably like a brother or a sister. And there's also like larger families. And when you think of larger families, most people think that, oh, they had those huge families because of farms, but helping out with the family. But in our parish, there's still a lot of families that have large families because that's what God has called us to do, to reproduce and multiply. So there's a lot of large families at our parish. But I called my mom and asked her about her siblings, because she comes from 11, and they lived in, all over like Elizabeth and stuff. So they actually had a huge family, Avenel and such, living in the city. And she told me like a lot of her stories, of favoritism and like a big age difference between her and some of her older ones, because my mom is actually second to the youngest. And how, her mom had, both her parents had passed by the time she was 14. So a lot of her siblings were actually bringing up the younger ones like they were already adults, and had them living in so a lot of them had to go live with, like older brothers and sisters. And how also siblings of that age could lead to like being either a shepherd, and there was like my Aunt Millie, who my mom first was saying, how everybody just loved Aunt Millie, and she was always a shelter for anybody who had any issues or problems, that, Aunt Millie was the one to go to. So that was just, I thought, very interesting, like the different dynamics that could be within a family. But she was just saying that, it always and always still is family. And they was instituted by her her parents, my grandparents, like holidays, getting together as a family. And we still do. And we rent out, this was the first year that we haven't. And I don't know, my mom was saying like at least a good 40 years or so that we rent out a hall, and everybody, with all our cousins and all, we all get together and celebrate the holidays together. So that was cool, that, families and stuff.
Right.
But I was going to say, for me and my brother, it was one of those things where we lived in a duplex, and this is where my grandmother, she used to call me her kingaling, and I took a lot of cues from my grandmother, and it caused a real division within the family and my brother, because my grandmother really looked down to my brother, and I did a lot of things with my grandmother living in the duplex, and she just wouldn't even allow my brother like in the house, and she actually sidelined a lot of my cousins as well. And I was the firstborn grandson, and I had all the privileges of being a firstborn grandson, and it's just like crazy. But I was just going to skip down to like one of the stories I did want to explain with my brother was that I was always, because of my uncle and all, the music guy. And well, I'll leave that for later on. Anyway, so anyway, there's lots of dynamics that I think that go into siblings and my kids as well, that they're almost unspoken language. They can make each other laugh. They know how to get on each other's nerves. And one without the other is just like, I don't know. They how they would survive without each other now that they do have each other.
Right.
I think
Bill, you had mentioned privileges earlier too, having the privilege of being the oldest grandson. I think as grandkids go, I think that can be a privilege. But as kids go, being the oldest, I found, and I have a sister who was 7 years younger, I found that it was a little more difficult for me, and I had to kind of cut that path. And my parents were maybe a little more strict on me, when you talk about the double standard and those kinds of things. But I think it worked out better for me than it did for my sister. I'm glad that, at the time I didn't like it, but now I'm kind of glad that it worked out that way, that they were did have higher standards for me, I guess, is kind of part of it. Because I think by the time they got to my sister, they had relaxed a little bit because they'd been through it once with me. And so it turned out very well for me. And, I took a lot away from that, but, not having feelings of being treated unfairly in my home. I wanted to make sure that Frankie, as he was growing up, my son, was treated fairly as well. So, with my marriage to his stepmom, she had a daughter, and it was very, very difficult to maintain that fairness for the two kids, right? They're step siblings. It's my stepdaughter. And then I had to work with the wife at the time to try to come up with something fair, but it didn't work out very well. And it seemed like there was a lot of talk, and it I did not like that Frankie seemed to get the short end of the stick, if you will. But that's kind of what happened to me. And, and I didn't want to say it, but because it's a lot different when you're a kid going through it versus when you're a parent trying to ensure that things are fair for everybody. But it's just very difficult. And I think that the downfall was on the parents in that situation for me, because we did not do a good job of working at it to make things equal, even though we did talk about it, but it still just didn't come through.
I had the complete opposite experience that you did. I grew up with 3 older brothers, and I was, of course, the baby, the favored child, all that. I could get away with shit like you wouldn't believe. I learned how to do it instinctively. I didn't do it deliberately. I simply did it instinctively. That I basically kind of got away with whatever I wanted to because they would get blamed for shit. And it wasn't until I was probably well into my teenage years when I started figuring out that might not be the most equitable thing. But my brothers certainly spent years harboring resentment toward me because I was always favored, and they understand why all that stuff happened. And since then, and we've all kind of gotten together, and things are a lot better now. But I was definitely the favored child, and no doubt about it. Took advantage of it to brutal extents. Now I've got my 2 sons who, and by the way, while I was growing up, there was fighting constantly. There was frustration on their part, and they would fight with each other, and they'd fight with me, and all that. Which I also took to be perfectly normal. I was raised in an environment where fighting amongst boys, especially, is expected. If you don't fight amongst yourselves and care for each other and all that stuff, but if you don't fight, it's wrong actually, because it's just not natural. And Jason shaking his head. I'm sure the girls are like that too, to a certain extent. So the division in our house, my now ex-wife, one of the things that we never agreed on was with sons, start battling with each other. I had a simple rule: no blood. I don't care what you do. You just can't draw blood. You can't cause me to have a medical bill of any kind. So they'd start beating each other up. I would literally pick up my drink, my newspaper or whatever, and I'd just walk out of the room and say, "Call me when you're done." I didn't care. And she thought it was horribly abnormal, and how dare you let them do this, and you're not parenting them properly, and you're not raising them the way you should, and all that. And we very much disagreed on that topic. But I mean, my sons love each other. They hug each other when they see each other. They hug each other when they're leaving each other. They definitely love each other. There's no doubt about it. But they do tend to battle at times because they do disagree about some things. And I mean, they're 18 and 21, and I still don't get in the way. I just walk out of the room. I don't care.
Your wife would.
What was that, Jason?
Your wife would have fucking lost her mind. Your ex-wife would have lost her fucking mind if she ever saw my mother's side of the family. They would. My grandfather owned a martial arts facility. He owned a karate, which had a back room. If you've ever, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, look it up. The Hart family, the rest of the Hart wrestling family will talk about the dungeon. And it was this basement room with a big mat. And that was where Stu trained all the kids and a bunch of other people how to wrestle. Well, in the back room of my grandfather's karate studio, there was a back room with a mat with wood paneling on the walls, and there was no back door. And there was a door in the front to go in and out. So on numerous occasions, he literally would throw them in there by themselves, my mother and her sisters, close the door and walk away. And sometimes just not even open the door even if they were about to kick it in.
Did they have the blood rule? No, they didn't have that.
In fact, there was one conversation between my mother and my Aunt Kathy, 20 years ago. They were talking about hair parts and calyx and things like that. And my Aunt Kathy grabs my mother's hand and she goes, "You feel this calyx? You feel this calyx? This is because of you. This is from when you broke the Coke bottle over my fucking head." And I'm not talking, obviously, not the plastic ones. You know what Coke bottles I'm talking about. No, and that happened a lot on my mother's side of the family. My mother was one of 9. This happened a lot. There's a lot of stories about that. Unfortunately, we've lost a few members of my mother's brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles. But yeah, no, even when they get together, still the stories will come out occasionally. I always looked at it as, even my mother didn't talk to a couple of her sisters for a very long time. And in fact, there was one up until maybe a year or two ago, she hadn't talked to in 25 years, I don't think.
Wow.
And they were adults too when they stopped talking. There was a falling out at a funeral, and it was not a pretty sight. It was my grandfather's funeral. It was not a pretty thing. Recently, within the last couple of years, like I was looking around one day and somebody commented on something on my mother's Facebook page. And I went, Patty Palazzo. I said, wait a minute. I said, that's my aunt. I was like, okay. I messaged my mother, said, you're talking to Patty again? She goes, yeah. Okay. And that was that. And we moved. And I think the next day I got a friend request from my aunt as well. So, and it just, it's cyclical with a lot of families. My father's family my father's one of five. Again, there was a sister that he didn't talk to, even until she passed away, that he hadn't talked to in many years. So I mean, it happens that in some families. While I would say I have had my share of ups and downs with my sister, I couldn't feasibly, I couldn't feasibly have that happen and think that I can't think of anything that would piss either one of us off that much that it was fuck you, and 25 years later it was still fuck you. I don't see that as being possible. Not in our book, at least. And especially considering my sister lives around the corner from me, it's a hell of a lot easier to swallow your pride for 2 seconds, walk over there, and that's it, and you deal with it that way.
And you had to do that, Jason.
What?
How often have you had to do that?
Very rarely. My sister and I don't fight. It doesn't happen, even as adults. It's stupid little things. Like I said, I couldn't see it being. I've gone to her house for other reasons when it comes to fighting, but it's not her I'm fighting with in most cases that I go to my sister's house.
So you've accepted the fact that she's always right. That's good.
No,
that's a good way to avoid the fight.
Even she admits that she's not. Anyway, the girls, like you said, Keith, with the boys, it's a very similar situation. When it comes to sibling rivalries, yes, there are differences between boys and girls, but it's only a certain amount of difference, and there's only certain differences. It's a lot of the same thing. It really is. Age isn't a matter. There's days when we can't stop them, and it's just like where don't draw blood is kind of a good way to put it, a good way to handle it. But then there's days where, like yesterday, we were sitting in bed, Elise and I, watching TV, and it had been about a good 45 minutes, an hour almost, where I turned around and went, it's awfully quiet in there. And I knew they were in the living room, so it was usually, within 20 minutes, there's some kind of crash or something. There's nothing for almost an hour. And I finally said, there's nothing wrong, obviously. I said, but I do want to get up and go see what they were playing with their new dolls that they had gotten together and watching SpongeBob. So I'd like for there to be more moments like that, but with them being confined to the house pretty much, it's been a little difficult. I will say that 100%. It has been very difficult at times, but I'll say what I'm gonna a little more for a little while, as the sibling rivalry may really see its peak within the next basically next week or so. Which one is it, Keith?
Sorry about that. Say again.
Which one is it? Who are we
Jeremy,
talking to?
we are leaving tomorrow for Ohio, and he's packing. So we were just discussing a couple of background questions while you were talking.
Justin's already gone, right?
Oh yeah, he's been gone for a week.
Yeah, I'll get into how the dynamic of sibling rivalry could change in this house very quickly, very shortly.
One of the things that just made me laugh is like you were saying about fighting with like your sister and stuff like that. But last night I was like walking and talking to my brother, and he, like I've said, has let's say a lot of opinions that are not, I don't know, not the same opinions as myself. So he was like out there like spewing facts and stuff. And I was like, yeah, no.
What he perceived as facts.
Yeah. And I came back and he was like, no, you're listening to mainstream media. I'm like, yeah, no. And he's like, well, how do you know? He's like, are you fact checking me while you're walking and talking? He's like, how? He's like, how fast are you typing? he's like, I can't believe you fact checked me. I'm like,
keywords. Keywords. You can fact check with keywords. It's very, very simple.
So he was just like, he couldn't believe it. He's like, you're walking, talking, and fact checking. I was like, yep. So anyway.
And Chad, you have any? Did you have a sister? You said, right?
Yeah, I have a sister. She's 7 years younger, and so it's a whole different ball game because I was pretty old when she was born. So, you got to figure seven and newborn is quite the age gap.
We're 6.5, my sister and I. So
okay, so you
and
understand.
that could be part of the same part of the reason that it's somewhat of a similar situation.
Yeah, and we growing up, it's like I was saying earlier, it's like I was the older one, she was the younger one, so I think she had some of the advantages. And even one thing I can remember was I had kind of this primo room in the basement. It was a great big bedroom with my private bathroom and all this. I mean, it's a perfect thing for a teenage kid. I basically had a living room down there as well, so super when I had friends over. And as a college, like my first year, and she wanted that room. So I told my mom, I'm like, well, I'll be back in 3 days. I'll come home and I'll move all my stuff out. But by the time I'd gotten back, they had taken all my stuff out of there and just like put it in the floor of this other room. And I'm like going, oh my God, and it's just like, she wanted to move. So like right away they had to move her and all my stuff. I'm like, okay, now I don't know. It just made it so much more difficult for me. And, lots of like, and some of it's kind of like small things, but it's like, it all adds up. Right. But, it's just kind of strange. And, and looking at like even discipline, being the older one, whenever I would be disciplined, I would get the kind of the hardcore punishment. And she would get and I'm thinking in particular about one time.
Well, don't do that again. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Well, that sounds familiar.
That's what you had that reversed in your family, right?
Oh yeah, they got abused. I mean, they got the belt, they got all the punishments, they got the big time. I got the behave yourself.
Yeah, it's funny, but thinking about kind of the dynamics that we have in this group, most of the kids are same sex, right? That we have, except for in the case with Frankie's stepsister, that was just so much more difficult because trying to make things for teenage kids, they were 3 months apart. And for a teenage girl versus a teenage boy, and she, even though she was 3 months older, she was in the grade ahead, just based kind of on where her birthday fell. And it was so much more difficult, I think, to organize those things for a girl, and just the things they want to do. It's like sometimes they're not easy to equate. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I'm sort of curious, and this is something that only you can have experience with. We wouldn't. Did the two of them ever look at each other and say, "You're not really my sibling"?
No, I don't think they ever did that.
Because I've seen, you see stuff like that in like movies and stuff like that, where step kids get angry and suddenly they're like, I'm not really related to you. It's, it's just a fluke.
Now, I got that. I got that a lot. You're not really my dad, and that kind of stuff. But between them, they always had a real good relationship. They still do to this day, and they talk a lot. And but Frankie, I think realizes, in his perception is, I think that she brings some drama to the equation, and so he talks to her, and he's super nice, and he loves her and everything, but at the same time, he doesn't play into some of the drama. But no, I don't think they ever said, "You're not my brother, you're not my sister." They always behave very, very well together, and but like I said, I was the step monster.
You still are.
Pretty nasty. What's that?
You still are in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you're the only one of us that also had steps. Am I correct? Or had parents that had steps as well, right?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had is really a half sister. So my sister was a half sister, and then my dad was married a couple of times. So I had several.
Right.
How many? I think 4 or 5 step sisters, but it's kind of different because I was a little older at that time. So it wasn't really like we even kind of played that game. It's just like, hey, I just call them by their first names and stuff. And so a few of them I'm still in contact with, and others I've fallen out of contact with, but it was just a whole different ball game at that time. And I would come and visit, and everybody would just kind of do the same things. There wasn't as much stuff like on a routine basis that I had, and the home where I lived with my mom, it was a lot different than visiting with my father. And so when I would visit, then it was kind of a party atmosphere. Everybody was in a good mood because we're always doing something fun, because I was in town, or because they wanted to make it fun for me. But everybody was really good natured about all of that stuff. So it worked out good. But there wasn't a real, the day-to-day issues just were not there. It was much more of a, he's coming in for this week, and then we'll see him in 5 months.
Right.
Yeah, I think what we were saying about with the rules being different between the first and the second kids, I seen some of that too as well. And it was funny because I don't think I really realized until I was a little bit older about as much difference, how I was more like strictly, the rules were a little bit more strict and stuff, and where my brother was a little bit more relaxed. And then when I started to, my brother was a little bit, well, we both were obviously a little bit older, just three years difference. The worldliness of my brother and the things that he knew were like nearly baffling. And one of the terrible stories is just one of the things that I learned from my brother was like, with the parents was, stealing the car. And how, it was like, and how not to get caught. And how you don't get caught is by taking somebody else's license plates and putting them on your car. Because the first time he got caught was, in New York City. So of course my parents didn't realize, and the ticket came back that your car was illegally parked in New York City. So we then realized, well, he then explained to me and realized that if you have somebody else's plates, most likely you won't get a ticket if you park in the wrong place in New York City.
Why am I not fucking surprised that this conversation came up between you
Decided that my kids are not allowed to watch these podcasts now.
This does not surprise. I don't even know your brother, but the little I do know of him, none of this fucking surprises me at all. No, sorry, but it doesn't.
Well, on the other hand, I was always a music guy because my uncle brought me up as a young kid with playing records, and we loved music, and my mom loved music, and you could always hear doo-wop and 50s and 60s out the windows, wherever we were. And even going swimming at my Aunt Millie's house, it was always the same, swimming in the pool and hearing the music. So one of the things that my brother kept trying to get me interested in is like different bands that he heard, with the 3 years difference. and I wouldn't have any of it because only what I listened to was the only thing that mattered, and he was like, oh, Weird Al. And I was like, whatever. Or Black Sheep. And I was like, no, that's garbage, and poo-pooed a lot of things. So he had kept carrying on about this band Nirvana. You got to listen to Nirvana. You're going to love it. And this is like before Nirvana broke. I was like, no. So it's like 91. And I've been going to this club called the City Gardens. And I brought my brother there a couple of times. And it was just like every indie and popular band you could ever think of played the place in Trenton, City Gardens.
Mhm.
And
I know it well,
Nirvana was
yes.
playing. And he's like, you have to take me. We have to go see Nirvana. So it was like Nirvana and I don't know, it might have been Screaming Trees. And it was $8. And I was like, no, no, no. And I was like, fine, I'll take you. So we drive out there, and I was like, well, I'm not leaving here. I'm going to park myself in the back by the bar, and I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to enjoy any of this. And it's probably one of the greatest shows in the world that I technically missed because of my own thing that I couldn't just accept anything that my brother offered me.
Funny.
Yeah.
I should take this opportunity to do something I rarely do, and that is give compliments to the woman I was once married to. When she was growing up, she had a younger brother by 3 years, has a younger brother by 3 years. So Dina and Eddie grew up in the same house. Eddie would be a high school star athlete in all the sports, break all the records. He would go on to be the star leader of the Rider College at the time baseball team. And then he would play minor league baseball for 4 years. So he was a big time athlete. And Dina was Dina. She didn't do anything. She was a pretty decent student, but didn't have any extracurricular activities to speak of. You can imagine that her parents, particularly her father, who was completely invested in his son's future Major League Baseball career, they doted on him entirely and spent years ignoring their daughter. Now, not totally. As I learned later on when I was actually close to her parents, it wasn't as horrendous as she made it out to be, but there was certainly it was unequal treatment that was huge. And she always swore that her kids would never suffer the same fate. Now, we argued about it. There were times when she went wildly overboard to make sure they had exactly the same opportunities, exactly the same experiences. I always thought, there were times when, there's somewhat different kids. Maybe you don't have to be exactly, but she was right. And to that end, the boys had very, very similar upbringings, identical opportunities to do things. We always traveled together. We almost never did something with just one of them and not the other. And they were treated extremely equally. And they grew up to be very, very well-adjusted kids who actually enjoy spending time with each other as well. So I have to give her hats off to that because she was extremely diligent about not showing any favoritism and not having second child syndrome and not having more pressure on the first child and things like that. The things that typically happen. I mean, there was still a little bit of that because that's just the way society is. But within the family, yeah, she did a pretty good job. And and I followed suit. I followed her lead in that area. So they turned out pretty good. And I think that I'd rather do it closer to the way she said that she pushed for than not, because it wound up being the right philosophy. We disagreed on a lot of other things, but that was pretty good stuff. And it's so the challenge here is, I was raised in sibling rivalry and beat the crap out of each other, and older kids get blamed for stuff, and I wasn't as worried about it. I wonder if I hadn't had her influence, if I would have raised my kids quite the same way. and what was the influence, of course, of how your parents treated your sibling rivalries on how you raise your kids now? That would be the question. I mean, I can see it very clearly for me. I know that Justin and Jeremy either celebrated together or suffered together for pretty much everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it wasn't that way in my house when I was a kid. Oh my God, I never suffered for anything. Not from my parents' hand, at least. My brothers took care of that, on the other hand. Boy, did they leave me some scars. Oh yeah, I got torn. Go ahead.
I can see what you're saying there, Keith. The influence of the parents of the quote unquote grandparents on the parents and how they raise their kids, how we have raised our kids, right? I think that's huge. And you know, I think I'm much more in tune with the differential treatment because the way I was raised, and tried to prevent that to some extent. Although I really, in the end, the result of me being treated with perhaps maybe a little more responsibility, or given a little more responsibility, turned out very good for me in terms of kind of my motives and my ambition and those kinds of things, and how I pursue things, how I view things. But in the raising of my son, then I wanted him with his stepsister to be treated very equal. And one of the things I remember is my grandma and grandpa, they would get us gifts, and they always wanted to keep it equal for everybody, right? So, I mean, they tried to be as equal as they could for everybody. And so, like, my sister would get a gift and I would get a gift, and then I might get like an envelope with like $7.32. And that's what kind of made up the difference in the amount that they spent on her gift and my gift, right? So that we both had a gift, but then I had the extra $7. So it was completely equal, you know, in terms of what they had given us.
And that's admirable and excessive all at the same time, if you ask me. I mean, to get that exacting, especially to put a value on gifts that's financial as opposed to out of love and things like that. It sounds interesting. I'm not saying yes or no. I'm just saying I'm not sure I would go down that path.
Yeah. But to me, because it's like, that's what everybody says is how much things cost, right? It's a big determinant now.
Yeah. I was gonna say with my grandmother, like our issue was that like it came down to like even like going to the shoe store, and she would pay for my shoes, and I'd only get the best ones, and refuse to even pay for my brothers at all. And that's like how like cutthroat it became, that you know that my grandmother, like with the choosing of sides and stuff, and that pretty much she acted like she only had one grandchild at well, the majority of her time, you know, that that she was alive, was that she had like one grandson, and pretty much all the other grandkids like didn't matter to her.
No, my parents did a. I don't. Maybe I'm blocking things. I don't know. I don't think I am. I just don't really remember not much happening between my sister and I or anything like that. And pretty much, yeah. I mean, everything was absolutely done equally, as far as I can remember. Remember that, like I said, there was a 6.5-year age difference, so it was, yeah, like I said, I mean, everything was done fairly fairly similar. And it's, I think for both of my sister and I, both, it's been, we try to play it the same way. My sister and I haven't discussed it, like the way we raise our kids, but it's obvious that both of us are giving both our children the same what I'm looking for here, the same privileges, I guess you want to say, to access and everything like that. Now, I mentioned something as to the sibling rivalry itself, in and of itself. Next Sunday, which we actually have to change the time we tape, because next Sunday is Sadie's birthday, and we'll be at my in-laws for most of the day. Pretty much next Monday, she started taking some of them. She's been in her class a few times. Pretty much only when Delane has been alone, where has Sadie gone in her class. But next Monday, really, Sadie's being moved up, or wants to be moved up, and we want to move her up, and the coaches are okay with it, most likely, that Sadie's going to be moving to the older class in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu next Monday, probably. We think she's ready. She thinks she's a little timid because the kids are bigger and things like that, but she's outgrown her class. It's time. The teachers even look at her and go, yeah, it's time. She's going to be moving up into the older class, and I would prefer her to work with her sister, because the other kids just aren't or simply aren't as experienced as Sadie is. There's only one pairing of kids that I would really let Sadie work with, besides from her sister, and they're not really around anymore. But no, I mean, and I could foresee possible issues because of how they can be with each other sometimes. I hope there won't be any medical bills involved, but
You've already had your share, you know.
yeah. But I am prepared to have to deal with emotions running high. It's gonna happen. I know it's gonna happen. But as it comes to growth in sport, it's something Sadie needs. If she's going to continue growing, and Sadie is going to continue growing, but she in the young class, it's kind of the big fish in the small pond situation at this point. So the change needs to be made for her growth in jiu-jitsu itself. But yeah, fingers crossed, there won't be any major issues.
Is there a chance that Sadie becomes better at this particular athletic event than her sister?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the sibling rivalry will come in.
She can hear me. I think she can, but I think she's ignoring me. She's probably watching. She was watching some singing show when I started.
So
yes.
her mother taught her well.
Oh, no.
To ignore you.
Oh, that part. Yeah. No. Sadie has my tenacity at times. I have, in certain things, I have had a little bit of an instinct to you want to call it a killer instinct. Sadie's got it. I've seen it. Delana has it. Delana is developing it. I've started to see it rear its head, but in that aspect, if Sadie, like I did, learns to use the killer instinct, but can manage to not put herself in situations where that killer instinct bites her in the ass. Sadie, there's other things. Sadie is much more flexible than Delana, which is a big help when it comes to jiu-jitsu. And Sadie has a little bit more of a potential to get herself in and out of situations by doing things. And this is something that I did a lot. Doing things that shouldn't necessarily work for you to get out of that situation. In wrestling, there's one thing they tell you to do: never reach back. And I got pretty good at it, getting out of situations by doing exactly what they told us not to do. And Sadie's pretty good at that when it comes to jiu-jitsu as well. So, but yeah, I do see that there's a possible chance that Sadie could be better. Could eventually be better. Right now, if tournaments were still happening, I think Delana would be probably within a month or two of her first tournament. So, but Sadie would probably be following right along in that aspect. So yeah, I definitely could see Sadie possibly overtaking her. Yeah.
And you think, Jason, too, that they would work well together? I mean, there's kind of the rivalry, but at the same time, if they're both in the same sport, right? It seems like it could be better. My experience growing up was that in high school was that typically the best athletes were the younger siblings of a larger family, right? Because they were always beat up and they were always playing whatever game it is, whether it's football or baseball or something like that. And really good. You look at the Williams sisters in tennis, and I think there's a lot of examples out there where that happens, and maybe this is another one of them.
Well, I believe actually it works out usually if you look at some of the musical pairings, the younger sibling is usually the more multitasking, you able to play more instruments. I know with like the Black Crowes, Chris is the singer, Rich is the guitar player, Rich is the younger brother. The Davies, I believe, was the same situation. Ray was older. The singer Ray was older than Dave. Dave was the guitar player and the multi-instrumentalist. Hart and the singer, Nancy the musician. Maybe the exception. There's a few exceptions. Obviously, one of them being the Mannings. Peyton being by far the better player than his brother. As Keith looks at me,
brother would disagree with that.
What'd you say?
I'll bet his brother would disagree with that.
His brother might, but society wouldn't.
But they're both playing at an elite level.
They're both retired. But no, I believe, thinking back, yeah, it's the same thing with the musicians. It's what Van Halen. Alex, as good as Alex is at drumming, Eddie was 5 different instruments. Mm-hmm. Piano, guitar, bass. I know Eddie could play pretty much anything. And obviously Eddie had the better voice as well, or we would have heard Alex sing. But no, yeah, that definitely is a case in some situation, in probably a lot of the situations. The Williams sisters. I'm sure there's probably hundreds of them but if you look at it on the whole, you're probably right. you're probably right. It is probably the younger sibling that.
Well, I can even think of an example in wrestling. One of my really good friends wrestled 167, was a state champ. And his brother, I'm not sure that he even made it to state, but he was like at 126 or 132, significantly lighter. But as soon as the younger one got mad at the older one at a practice, man, the older one would take off because the younger one would go whoop him. I mean, it was just that he just like had that. He knew how to get to his older brother, right? And it could take him a lot of times. But that reminds me of this funny story too. This one girl that went to my school, she grew up in kind of a large family. They were a farm family. And so she had a lot of older brothers. She was the youngest sibling. And in junior high, she won our arm wrestling tournament. She beat all the guys. She was tough, a skinny little thing with braces, but just bam, one after the other. It's funny.
Yeah.
Justin, my older son, would be the first one to tell you that Jeremy has more talent academically and more talent musically, which is their thing. But Justin works hard at everything he does. And Jeremy's like, yeah, whatever. He doesn't really even seem to give it any effort. So Justin's still been more successful, but I think Jeremy's still chasing him. Even at the age of 18, he's still chasing him and trying to accomplish more. In that way, there's a hidden sibling rivalry that I think there's a frustration on Justin's part because things seem to come much more easily to him. And Justin looks at Jeremy, who doesn't give a shit, doesn't give an effort, and says, if I had my brother's skills and I had gave the effort that I give it, I'd probably be president of the United States.
He could have followed in his uncle's footsteps. He could have been a professional baseball player.
Well, certainly Justin was very talented, but we didn't have any money, so we had no ability to give him the private coaching and trainers that all the professional athletes grow up without.
Right.
And Justin probably could have been a college, maybe a Division III baseball player, maybe even Division I, if he had like all that specialized training. But he didn't have that privilege, unfortunately. Jeremy never had any athletic skill, but it was in the other areas. Justin was always solid, really, really advanced in math, and then Jeremy goes and gets an 800 on his SATs in math. And Jeremy never studied. Jeremy literally walked into the SATs, hadn't studied a lick, and gets a freaking 800 on his math SATs. We all wanted to kill him. But, stuff just comes easily to him. And there are moments when I see that look in Justin's eye, like he wants to wring his neck because he just wishes he had that ability combined with his own passion to succeed. That's where sibling rivalry still lurks in the darkness. I think we've lost Doug.
No, he's there. I could see his mouth moving. It looked like he was about to say something, and then he stopped.
Yeah, I just thinking about the sibling rivalry and all, my brother and all, and I just was trying to think more or less. I talked to the boys and what they like, about each other and stuff like that, and but just trying to think of me as a parent and how I'm taking care of it, because I remember we didn't have the T-shirt that put us both together, but I know that part of it was that, like, parents' views versus like what's going on and what's good and what's bad. It was more or less is that as they get older, you have different friends, and sometimes all the kids don't get together, and you try to exclude your brother. And when there's exclusion, of course, parents like all of a sudden like want to be involved and say, well, you can't exclude your brother. Well, if me and my friends are doing something, how, and my brother's going to interrupt or be teasing me because my parents, my father and my brother, I was more the quiet type. So my father and brother are huge teasers. They love to get under my skin. They still do. And now I see myself teasing my kids, which I guess isn't right as a parent. But sometimes, you want to distance yourself, be your own person, and my parents were always, well, if you can't do it together, then you can't do it. And it was kind of like one of those things where, if you're not going to be friendly and with your brother, well, guess what? All you are going to just sit together. And for a short time, it was like, well, guess what? Your only friend is your brother. And it's very interesting. And my dad, well, my brother was also, interestingly enough, he's younger than me, but much taller and broader than me. So later in life, he also became like a protectorate, let's say. And where I would be mild and meekish, he would be the louder and also stand up for me in a lot of ways, which was really cool to see, especially looking back now. It's like, thinking about all the things that Jeff has done, for me when I didn't stand up for myself, and how he was. And it's just really interesting when now, only because we decided that we were going to talk about this, like looking back at all these different times and all these different situations, and what kind of parent am I going to be, and what's going on with my own kids and all. So it's just very interesting, and it's also what kids will play to, I guess, to their parents. It's like part of it too, you know, and what their interests are and who their favorite parent is, which really you don't want to say they have a favorite parent, or they, your kids get favoritism from a parent or other. You want to think that you're doing everything liberally, equally, but sometimes I guess it's really not that until you look outside of yourself and like review and take a couple minutes like I did this week, after we decided on this subject.
Yeah, it certainly can be hard at times. I think you do have to review and you have to be conscientious of those things whenever you have more than one kid, and think about the impact down the road. And there's all kinds of things, that I look back on now, kind of in the past, hindsight's 2020, right? And wish I would have done a little different. But I think that's part of parenting as well, is, we don't do things perfectly. We try our best, and there is no manual for it. And every kid is different. And we just have to do our best when we're at that time. And we can certainly be brief about it later in years later, but it's tough to do things perfectly.
I tell you, that's one of the hardest things to remember. Every kid is different. I mean, I consciously think it all the time. And yet I can't tell you how many times I've looked at Jeremy and said, Justin didn't do that. And you stop yourself from doing it. And you'll catch yourself right away and you're like, okay, but he's a different kid. But it always comes out constantly. And Dina, my ex, very good at reminding me to pay attention to those differences, but still try to weave a common solution so that they had equal opportunity.
Yeah, and that's the hard part too, is because when you have kids with different personalities, different maturity levels, even if a younger one can be more mature than the older one, or who knows what, it's there's so many variables at play with that, with the siblings. I think that's one of the harder things to manage as a parent.
Yeah, we're never going to have the concern about the younger one being more mature than the older one around here. No. But then again, my brothers would tell you that they never have that concern either. There's no way in hell I'll ever be more mature than they are.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Remember those last thoughts. They are always different kids.
What was that?
They are always different kids. Elena and Sadie are definitely different girls, even though they do a lot of the same things.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a big thing that we actually came up yesterday in a meeting that I was in. And it's progress, not perfection. That's something that gets overlooked a lot in society and in life in general. But yeah, absolutely. Every kid is different. You're not going to get you can do the same thing for each kid, and you're going to get different responses. So right there tells you they're not. You can't always expect at all everyone, any child, any person really, to react the same to the same stimulus. It's just you're going to get a different reaction every time, no question about it.
I was gonna say, I talked a lot about my brother and discussed with my mom last night. I wasn't able to get back on talking about my brother last night. I talked to him for a while, but I didn't really touch on this subject. But my mom was like just pointing out that how much my brother loves me, respects me, and is always trying to like still show me how important he is and how important he is, well, just to the whole family and stuff and dynamics of siblings, and how he overindulges my kids with everything he does, and what a credit it is to him because of his respect and wanting to show to me how important I am. He pours it out on my kids. So that was a cool thing that me and my mom was discussing last night, with siblings. So I just want to add that before I go.
I would be very curious to get your mom's perspective on your sibling rivalry. I'd like to hear her directly from her on that one.
Oh, don't ask for that because she listens.
I was going to say, as soon as this goes up, if she watches it, you're probably going to get that response you're looking for, Keith.
That's why I slipped that one in there, because I know she's listening and she'll hear what we say.
I was going to also
Put
say
it in the
that
comments.
yeah, if anybody else has any stories or whatever, they could just add it to the comments on this page. Like if you have your own story of sibling rivalry or siblings in your own house or your kids, then add to your comments.
My oldest brother, Joel, who is 11 years older than me, by the way, that's the gap is 11 between the four of us now. He recently signed up for this group, and this week will be the week that tells me whether or not he's actually watching the podcasts, because I'm sure he would have a comment or 1,000 to throw into the chat if he listens to this.
I think that's a pretty good place for us to leave this. We probably can come back to it, I'm sure, at another time. As I'm looking, going, where'd the last 25 minutes go?
See how much fun you had?
What's that?
See how much fun you had?
Yeah, relationship dynamics are an ever-changing animal. It's easier to say or think you can manipulate a situation with a relationship or make a relationship go a certain way. But it's never the case, really, because you can't control other people. You can't control situations. You can't control things that happen, things that are said. The only thing you can control is you and your responses. Fortunately, or unfortunately, we have to play the hands we're dealt with when it comes to relationships, especially with siblings. all we can do is do our best to make the best of the relationship. All we can do, ever do in life, is do the best we can. If you do the best you can, what else can you ask for? So from all of us here at Dads on Life, take care, everybody.
Take care.